Good morning, Carroll County. This is Brian DeLeonardo, your state's attorney, with this week's State's Attorney's Report. I hope all of you enjoyed Thanksgiving with your family. It certainly is a time of year that it's a great opportunity for us to reflect and for all the things that we should be thankful for. And this morning, one of the topics I wanted to do is grand jury. You know, it's kind of an opportunity to look at a little bit of what we do and hopefully answer a few questions, because a lot of times people will have conceptions of grand jury and what that is. So this morning, I was glad to bring in our Circuit Court Chief Attorney, Allan Culver. So good morning, Allan.
Good morning, Brian.
Hopefully you had a good Thanksgiving as well?
I did. Nice and relaxing.
Yeah. Do you eat too much turkey like me?
That is the tradition, yes.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I asked Allan to come in this morning because Allan really oversees our grand jury. And, since I came into office, we have really changed the way we approach grand jury. It's something, in my opinion, it's a very important function for the citizens to participate in what we do. So I brought Allan in this morning to hopefully, explain to us a little bit about what he does. So, Allan, could you first of all talk a little bit about what is a grand jury versus a regular jury?
Well, grand jury is something that most folks who don't deal with the criminal justice system on a regular basis are not that familiar with. When you watch your crime and justice television, things like that, you see a regular jury that's involved with a trial.
Which would be your 12 jurors.
Exactly. Right. The grand jury is very different from that perspective. It's actually prior to a case being charged. So what the grand jury does is it actually acts as a body to determine whether or not there is probable cause for charges to be forwarded to our circuit court. So they work on the front end of the criminal justice system when your regular jury, so to speak, works on the back of the system.
Right, and we talk about a regular jury that most people will be familiar with has 12 people. How many do we have on our grand jury?
Our grand jury consists of 23 members. Mm-hmm. What we need, and with a regular jury, it's a unanimous verdict. But with a grand jury, only 12 of the 23 have to vote to indict for the charges to move forward. So there are certainly differences between the two. Now,
with our system, how often, if you get, people often say, I've been called for jury duty. Well, if you're called for grand jury duty, it's an entirely different animal altogether. So how long does a grand jury serve, and how often do they meet?
If someone is chosen for the grand jury, they serve for a 6-month term. And the way it works in Carroll County is our grand jury meets every other Thursday. So it essentially ends up being 2 Thursdays a month. Mm-hmm. As you indicated, when you came into office, we changed it. It used to be the grand jurors would come maybe once a month. We wouldn't even call them in every month. But now, where we're really utilizing grand jury a lot more for the variety of things you can do with a grand jury, they're coming in 2 Thursdays a month.
Yeah, and one of the reasons for that is that all of our felony cases, I believe it's important for those to go before the grand jury so that these members of the community get to see what's going on and have a say in who's getting charged. And I think it is important for them to have that function. But in addition to just charging, there's a real investigative component to using grand jury. So can you tell us a little bit about that, Allan?
Sure, without a doubt. And the way the grand jury works, like you indicated, they have to choose to indict someone. So from our office's perspective, we have to present evidence to them so they make a determination as to whether or not to indict. Usually we will have one of the investigators from the state's attorney's office present all the evidence we have at that point. And we've done a much better job lately getting a lot more information in the beginning of the case so that we can present it to the grand jury so they have as much information as possible to look at when they decide whether or not to indict. But along those lines, we can also bring in witnesses. With some of our more complicated cases, or if we have difficult witnesses, they can be served with grand jury subpoenas where they're required to come in and testify. And that is advantageous for a number of different reasons. One, it's sworn testimony. So it locks them in so we know what they would testify to if in fact they went to trial. And it's also helpful to kind of figure out what witnesses would testify to. do to give us a perspective of how do we proceed with this case if this is how our witnesses will testify at trial. So we use both of those options in terms of the investigative aspect. Grand jurors, the foreperson can also sign subpoenas for us so that we can get information, whether it's business records or other type of information. So there's a number of different avenues you can use in terms of the grand jury being an investigative body.
Yeah, and it's a really important function because, we have done that where we've, the grand jury can send a subpoena and force someone come in under oath. They certainly, if they have the right to invoke their Fifth Amendment privilege, they could. But otherwise, if they're a witness, they would have to testify. And by putting them under oath, it's different than when they can just answer an officer in the street. They might not tell him the truth, but if they come in and they don't tell the truth to under oath in the grand jury, then they really have committed a crime, and that's something we take very seriously, isn't it?
It is, and in fact, we've had to prosecute people for coming before the grand jury and testifying falsely. It's a high standard to be able to prove that, but unfortunately, we have had people who come in and don't realize the serious nature of the grand jury and for whatever reason decide to not tell the truth, and unfortunately they're prosecuted for it.
And the other aspect of grand jury I think is a good one to highlight is the confidential nature of it. We do these charges and we do these investigations, but maybe you can talk a little bit about, although we have 23 people in there, the confidential nature of what we do in there.
We do have 23 people, but it is explained to them up front, and they do take an oath that anything that occurs within that grand jury is to remain confidential. We are under strict standards as to who can actually be present in the grand jury room when there's a grand jury session going on. Typically, it's your grand jurors. If we have a recorder who is also sworn, takes an oath to keep things confidential, and any prosecutors or witnesses related to a presentation. So that's it. You can't have interns coming in to visit, things like that. It's very strict. And as I said in the beginning, the grand jurors are told that this is to remain confidential. You can't go home and tell your spouse or talk to anybody about what you did in grand jury that day, which is difficult for some people, but it does enforce the serious nature of the grand jury, because you never know. If they don't indict somebody, it's not fair for that information to get out. And if they do indict somebody, it's still an ongoing investigation and it needs to remain confidential.
Especially in some of the cases where we've had ongoing investigations. We have to know that when we present certain information, that it's confidential. It could compromise the whole case.
Without a doubt, yes. Yeah. The case is essentially investigated until prosecution, so it's important to remain confidential.
Well, now, one of the things that we also do is we try to do some educational components to the grand jury, because I think one of the things I really like about how we're using grand jury now is, we're bringing 23 people in every 6 months. And it's a good opportunity for them, citizens, to get the chance to see what goes on really in a day in and day out in the court system, but also learn a lot about what we do and what law enforcement does. So can you tell some of the things that grand jurors get to do in addition to hearing cases?
Sure. Well, the first thing, like we said, most folks who appear and are required to be on a grand jury don't have the background with the criminal justice system. So they kind of come in sort of like a blank slate. So it's an opportunity to really educate people and let them know about the inner workings of the criminal justice system. And that begins with the orientation that you started when they come in. It kind of goes through the nuts and bolts of what they're going to do as grand jurors and how the criminal justice system has worked. And along those lines, during their 6 months, we've set up tours for them. The last grand jury had an opportunity to tour the Carroll County Detention Center. They also toured the Maryland State Police Crime Lab. Those are opportunities that most people don't get. In the Carroll County Detention Center, it's basically a 90-minute tour. They get to see the entire detention center from the cells to the kitchen to everything. And then we take them down to the Maryland State Police Crime Lab, where they get an extensive lecture from the crime scene tech supervisor. And then they get a tour of the crime lab, where they do chemical analysis, DNA analysis, they process evidence, things of that nature. So we're really trying to expand on the grand jury experience.
Yeah, and that's great. And it just, again, it's another way that we try to involve the citizens and educate them. So I want to thank you, especially with it being a holiday weekend. Thank you very much, Allan, for coming in this morning and explaining about grand jury to us.
You're welcome. I'm happy to appear. Happy holidays, everyone.
Well, exactly. Happy holidays to everyone, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your holiday weekend. This is Brian DeLeonardo, your state's attorney, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.